here. I just wanted to talk about something I touched on a couple days ago, and that was namely being properly protected. I was talking in reference to the clothing I was wearing that day because I was going to be working outside in frigid temperatures, so I had my -80 Sorels on and my padded coveralls and what have you. So that would, in the industry, they call that PPE, right? Personal protective equipment. Safety glasses, steel-toe boots, those sort of things, reflective vests and what have you to be safe, right? And of course, in certain circles, that also includes condoms and these sort of things. It's protection of our, individual safety, I guess. Although, we talk a lot about how one of our greatest quality of life experiences in terms of what we would call the outer world, the world that's outside of our individuality, is the relationships we have with others. Well, just because I suppose others are the most similar to us, so the more of us or similarities to us we can experience, the greater is our quality of life. It sort of makes sense, right? I mean, there's a greater relationship between ourselves and somebody else than there is between ourselves and a blade of grass. It's because we can talk, we can emote together, we can embrace and whatever, share meals together, all those sorts of things. Now, I would also say that because there's the potential for the greatest experience, there's always seems to be a counteracting flip side to that, which is that some of our greatest disappointments, the greatest challenges and greatest chance for injury also comes from relationships. Relationships can be extremely treacherous if we're not aware and we don't have the proper protective attitude, protective strategy, and this sort of approach. So protection is very important. Like there's always there's kind of like in life we develop areas we're going to chart, other areas we're going to stay away from that because that's a boundary, right? And I think one of the ways we can protect ourselves is to live as much as we can through a set of principles. In other words, what it is we stand for, what it is that we tolerate, what it is that we enjoy, these sort of things, and then because we all know that we can't involve ourselves in every relationship. I mean, there's 6 or 7 billion people on the planet. We're not going to be involved with every individual on an enjoyable relationship level, or even a business relationship level, or any kind of an interactive relationship level. So therefore, why bother, number one? And number two, a lot of relationships that we would get involved with, that we might get involved with, are not helpful, to say it mildly, and can be actually destructive. Because one of the delicate balancing acts of living from an individual perspective is the tendency, as we talked about before, to be selfish. It's an inherent need we have. We have to take care of ourselves, right? We have to take care of ourselves in terms of we have to eat. We have to, not only our physiology, but our finance and our, but all that supports physiology, of course, in our individual lives. We know that, but we also know as, empathetic people that there's times when we do put ourselves at risk to help loved ones, to help people in need, this sort of thing, and therefore we don't we don't go any farther than what we need and what it is that we can gain without harming others. So it's kind of like the only boundary is the harming of others, right? However, there are many people in the world, and we all know this, who don't seem to have that boundary. Sometimes the term psychopath is used to describe people, and I think that is kind of a narrow category, because surely there are, but you know, most people are not psychopathic. Wow, I'm seeing lots of dead deer on the highway today, just as an interruption here. There's a whole bunch of ravens up ahead. I'll just show you, that are pecking away at something. I just passed one, and then here's another one. Probably a dead carcass of some sort. Yeah, a bunch of them pecking away at a deer. In fact, I ran over one the other night. I was driving along, and it was all of a sudden it was dark, and all of a sudden there was a carcass lying in the middle of the road, and my truck kind of took a couple of bumps as I ran over part of the deer. Pretty horrendous for the wildlife out here, I'll tell you. Anyway, psychopath. Yeah, it's a term that's usually used, probably not used enough, but it is used to describe somebody, my understanding of it anyways, who doesn't really have a sense of empathy towards others. So the tendency to be selfish then extends, and there's no boundary to it. There's no boundary that says, when I'm harming somebody else or potentially harming somebody else, that's my boundary, that's my natural boundary. So they just keep going, and I think we all have an element of that in us. There doesn't seem to be a category of somebody who's completely psychopathic and somebody who's completely virtuous on the positive side. There's always moments, probably, when, you know, even what we would call a total psychopath can have his moments of empathy maybe, and there's times when incredibly good people otherwise would do things that they would say, well, what the hell did I do that for? Afterwards, a lot of times they might not be thinking, right? They might not be thinking about what are the consequences towards other people as a result of our actions. So therefore, you know, everybody really could be a potential fraudster, you know, at least, and everybody could be potentially dangerous. But for the most part, the people we know that we get along with, if they haven't shown that sign ever, then we just act as though they're not, right? And we give the benefit of the doubt for the times that people might slip up and just be unthoughtful or whatever, and we get on with it. But there is a whole class of people, I'd say, who, because humanity is made up of, it seems to be anyway, almost like in this discussion, in this topic anyway, pretty much as predator and prey, or what's another term? Parasite and host relationship, where there's people whose lives depend on the work of others. So they just basically steal, either directly or through agencies of things like government and mafia groups or whatever. And also through just tricksterism, you know, fraud and deceit, these sorts of things. And so protection of ourselves is very important, because we have to, when we know this, when we're aware of it, when we've experienced it, then it's not as though we have to be looking over our shoulders all the time. It's just, well, sometimes that's important, but just to be aware of the potential. I think that's maybe a good enough starting point. Be aware of the potential of some people to rip us off or to injure us in some way.
just take the necessary precautions. And probably one of the simplest things we can do is by developing and becoming aware and reminding ourselves of what it is that we stand for. What is our virtue? What is our truth, right? And therefore, when we sense that a relationship is not going in accordance with that, we address it. We address it to ourselves. We address it to the other individual in the relationship, or the other individuals in the relationship, and we spell out what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. This sort of preemptive living by our principles standing, I think, helps us to, the old term, nip things in the bud, such that we don't then develop, we don't further that relationship, which is destructive. And then of course, if we are in, if we've overlooked that, or we're learning about these sort of things, we also have a way of digging ourselves out, because we've set these principles that there's got to be honesty, there's got to be openness, as an example. And if there's not, then there's closeness and hiding. But we have that right, because true relationships are meant to be voluntary, right? So we don't owe anybody else, except our children, I must say, because children are dependent on us. We don't owe any other adults any allegiance just because they say so. We do so because we volunteer to. Now, the only case that I would say where we do have relationships that are not voluntary, if we involve ourselves in any way, are from the extremely dangerous class. The extremely dangerous class are armed, and armed well, with all kinds of rituals, but ultimately with guns. And those are the people that we really have to be aware of. We have to comply with them to the extent of our safety. But we have to be, so we work within that to protect ourselves, to not expose ourselves to these people in terms of our, as much as possible. And we comply, but not because it's voluntary, but because complying is better than a bullet, or a theft of our property, or something like that, or the seizure of our children, the sort of things that will go on if we don't comply with tyrants. Because these are more than just, these are relationships that are more than just dishonest or something like that we can just slough off as, oh, you're not going to be honest with me, I don't have to be in this relationship with you. No, these relationships are downright dangerous because they're armed, and they will shoot to kill. A lot of people joke at me about this, but try defending yourself with the power that they have and see how many bullets will fly. It's quite obvious, right? So, but anyway, I think protection is important. So protection involves being aware of it, first of all, about the nature of some people to want to take advantage of us, and to have principles by which we stand, of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in our relationships. That's a protective mechanism. But also complying with the extremely dangerous, but only as a self-defense, as a protective mechanism itself. Complying with extremely dangerous people with guns is actually a protective mechanism. It's like, here, take my money and don't shoot me. That's I don't, it's not saying I want to give you the money or I want to give you the property. It's what it's really saying is I value life more than just this material. And of course, on the other side, the people with the guns, they value the material more than the life, because they will shoot if you don't comply. or if you defend yourself, which even they say they pay lip service to, you have the right to defend yourself against somebody who's violently assaulting you. If you try that on them, good luck. But anyways, that's protection is an important thing because, you know, we want to preserve our integrity, and which ultimately leads to quality of life, because all of this leads to an increased self-knowledge, and self-knowledge leads to ultimately, well, honesty leads to self-knowledge, and self-knowledge leads to honesty, and honesty in the end leads to, I would say, a form of happiness, and happiness we can only describe as the quality of life. So hopefully this little chatter was helpful, and I hope to, I'm almost at work here, to talk again soon. Bye-bye.